Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the April 26, 2018 edition of The Breast There Is, The Breast There Was, and The Breast There Ever Will Be Wrestling Podcast. As always, I am your host, Mikey B, WWE. And after 2 weeks of a rather chaotic, fun-filled, energy-packed time in the world of the WWE, after WrestleMania and all the fallout with the Superstar shakeup, things finally got to settle down a little bit this week on Monday Night Raw and Smackdown Live. I was saying on my last podcast that it would take a while to sort of digest all of the moves that have transpired in the 2 weeks since WrestleMania 34. Again, there's not only Superstar shakeup where some superstars have switched from one show to the other, from Monday Night Raw to SmackDown Live or vice versa. We also have, there's been some new debuts and some returns of some wrestlers. So to see how all this is going to sort of play out, it's, like I said, it would take a little bit of time. And after a very eventful past couple weeks, surprisingly, there wasn't a whole lot of action and noteworthy items on the two programs this week. The show Monday Night Raw did open, however, on a very classy note. I mentioned on my last podcast about Bruno Sammartino, the legendary wrestler, recently passing away. And prior to the start of the show, all the superstars appeared on the stage at the top of the ramp, and they did a 10 ring salute to Bruno Sammartino. And throughout both broadcasts, we got a lot of different quotes and memories being shared by former superstars and current superstars. Very touching, and I think certainly will shed some light to the younger wrestling fans out there about how much of an impact Bruno Sammartino really did make in this industry and with this company. So WWE handled that in a very classy fashion. Besides this, on Monday Night Raw, there was, even though there's new superstars and there's some of them have come over from SmackDown Live. There weren't a lot of very noteworthy new developments. Probably because there's a brand new pay-per-view that's starting up this Friday, and then we also have back to the regularly scheduled Sunday pay-per-views. The first one after WrestleMania Backlash will be coming up in about a week and a half. So it feels like they're in a bit of in between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to move forward with the Backlash one, but first they're dealing with this greatest Royal Rumble event in Saudi Arabia. I'll definitely discuss that a lot more, as I feel that the WWE is making a huge mistake having an event like this, and I'll explain that a bit on this program, but also on my predictions show for this brand new event coming up on Friday. But as for the actual important events that transpired on Monday Night Raw this week, following the Bruno Sammartino tributes, we also found out that Miz Taraj members Bo Dallas and Curtis Axel, now with The Miz having moved over to SmackDown Live, appear to be looking for some new leadership. They first tried to recruit Seth Rollins, and following this, they then tried to recruit Finn Balor. And after both of those individuals snubbed them, they wound up being put in a tag team match against the two of those guys. So that's one storyline that the company appears to be continuing on with, is who will the Miztourage then join up with, or will they just be their own tag team, or will they go solo on their own way? So still a bit of a question for former Miztourage members. We also learned in the main event of the evening, there was a 10-women tag team match with Mickie James and Alexa Bliss teaming up with the Riot Squad, taking on Nia Jax, Bayley, Sasha Banks, Natalya, and Ember Moon. This match did end in a DQ, and the only reason I'm really mentioning this is because Ronda Rousey made her appearance towards the end of the match to help Natalya out, which is further reinforcing their connection, in that they seem to be quite tight now in the storyline. These two are good friends, and so we'll see how they're going to work together and what sort of stories the company is going to plan for the two of them. Yeah, besides this, there was really not a whole lot else worth noting on Monday Night Raw. Again, it felt like they're building towards this Friday event, even though there's not a lot of build-up or new feuds that were being brought in for this. And then also they're sort of waiting for this event to transpire before they move on to back to the regular scheduled pay-per-view shows, with Backlash being the first one back on Sundays. So really a very lackluster Monday Night Raw after two very, like I say, jam-packed episodes. So moving on to Smackdown Live, there were a few more noteworthy items on this program. The Miz opened up the program this week, making his return back to Smackdown Live by hosting his edition of Miz TV for Smackdown. He called out Daniel Bryan to come down to the ring, as Daniel Bryan recently was saying on Twitter how he looks forward to punching Miz right in the face now that the Miz was back on SmackDown Live. Instead of Daniel Bryan making his way to the ring, we were not expecting Big Cass, who was also recently returned and is now on SmackDown Live. He is now coming down to the ring to confront the Miz, and basically went on a major verbal tirade about his how much he dislikes Daniel Bryan and how Daniel Bryan gets all this glory, and which Big Cass feels is undeserved. And Big Cass talks about how he's basically got all the criteria to become a big superstar, and he's where all the money's at. So so Big Cass, it's going to be interesting if they're going to launch him now into the main event kind of status. Prior to his injury 7 months ago, he was, it seemingly, primed for a bigger breakout role after splitting from Enzo Amore at that time, who is now a name that the company will not be mentioning, maybe ever again. And shortly after this interview from The Miz, we learned that Daniel Bryan was attacked backstage and was laying on the ground being treated by EMTs. So not sure about who was the culprit there, at least yet. In addition to this, we also saw backstage the Usos, the brothers, were Naomi approached the two of them. They were approached by her. And for many hardcore fans know that Naomi and Jimmy Uso in real life are actually married. But just recently, last week, when the Usos were getting punished and just obliterated from the Bludgeon Brothers again, Naomi came down to basically stop the attacks going on. And so backstage, Naomi confronted Jimmy and warned him just to be careful out there, and was offering to interfere if she needed to, just so that he wouldn't get destroyed any further. So this is worth noting because it appears that the company might now be writing some storylines for them as a married couple together, which was something which they had not previously been addressing. So it'll be interesting to see if they carry this on a bit further, or involve them in mixed tag matches, or how they're going to even have them relate to one another on the program. Besides this, we also learned that the NXT faction of Sanity is going to be arriving on SmackDown Live pretty soon. Didn't give us a specific date, and that Chaos will be coming. They'll be bringing Chaos to the WWE. So this group of Sanity, a 3-person faction, will be arriving on SmackDown Live imminently. Later on, backstage, Daniel Bryan was interviewed, and we learned from him that it was indeed Big Cass who did attack him. And we also found out that Big Cass will be facing Daniel Bryan at Backlash in a couple weeks' time. So first, it'll be the Big Cass's first pay-per-view match in many months, and it'll be Daniel Bryan's first solo pay-per-view match in a long, long time. So, so we're learning about that's a feud that's starting up between those two guys. And in the main event on SmackDown Live, there was a 6-man tag match between AJ Styles with tag team members Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson reuniting. These guys used to be the Club together, and they took on Rusev, Aiden English, and Shinsuke Nakamura. Nakamura now has some new entrance music, which I think further solidifies his heel status, and that they're going to keep him as a heel now for at least certainly the near future. I would imagine possibly for the next full year, but we'll see how much how successful this run is as a heel. I mean, the guy's so well respected as an in-ring worker, it may sort of backfire anyways on him. So yeah, besides this, these were all the major developments, or you even want to call them major. These were all the developments in WWE this past week. We did learn at this greatest Royal Rumble pay-per-view event going on in Saudi Arabia this Friday that Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio will also be involved. And it's worth noting this pay-per-view, why I'm not so keen on it anymore. I came to the realization myself after last week's broadcasts that I didn't recall there being any women being featured on this greatest Royal Rumble pay-per-view match. At least they weren't advertised any matches there. So sure enough, I checked, and it is indeed true that there are no women being featured on this event in Saudi Arabia. From what I understand, it's for cultural reasons. I guess they're not permitting women to wrestle there. But I think this is really a hypocritical move by the WWE. I mean, they've been talking and patting themselves on the back for this past year or so about how great the women's revolution has been, and how much the WWE women's roster has expanded, and it's, and they've had all sorts of firsts this past year. First women's Royal Rumble match, first women's Money in the Bank ladder match, a number of firsts. And the company seems to be taking a step in the wrong direction by agreeing to holding an event in Saudi Arabia which won't even allow any of their female superstars to be showcased. I think it's quite obvious that money is the main catalyst here, as it usually is with the WWE or with most businesses. But I still think this is a big mistake. And the fact that they're getting guys like Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio, guys who I personally am very fond of, Chris Jericho especially being one of my all-time favorites, but neither of these guys are active on the roster currently, so to have them come in for just this one night only event, I think speaks to the level of money and revenue that this company is looking like they're going to be taking in. So it's a shame that they're going to base a decision like this purely on money, while it's holding back their promising new women's revolution. And it also appears that the company has signed a 10-year agreement with the Saudi Arabian group. So there's going to be events, it sounds like, for the next decade every year, potentially over there in Saudi Arabia. It remains to be seen whether or not they will loosen up their stance and allow female competitors in the subsequent years. But for now, I think this is a huge mistake, and I don't approve of this one bit. So that's pretty much it for this week, folks. I will be giving my predictions for this pay-per-view, this male-only pay-per-view in Saudi Arabia coming up tomorrow. I'll be making another show giving my predictions for this program shortly. So don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you liked what you heard, and feel free to leave any comments or questions below as well. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next time.